Okay, tonight we're going to go cover the Kabbalah, which is
And this is
the,
Bart's idea.
this is, Marjorie's going to chime in. So here we've got it here. So let's get into share screen.
You don't want to start with the music?
Oh yeah, no, we can start with the music. Here's the music right here. This is
We hope not to tear each other apart before your eyes.
Ose Shalom.
Ose Shalom.
Shalom. Okay.
Shalom.
So let's get this thing teed up.
This is from a CD that I discovered looking for. I wanted music. I wanted Kabbalistic prayers and chants set to music. And I was standing in a store and there was this at right eye level on the CD rack in those days. This was probably around 20 years ago. I don't right around when it came out, so we could see that date. And I was just ecstatic. And I bought it without hearing it. And I fell in love with it. And I always like to play sacred music from various traditions for all of the labyrinth walks, because I see it as a really interfaith tool for peace. And I love this image of the tree of life and this kind of Middle Eastern thing, and it's just lovely.
Here's the tree of life, and we've got the 10 Sephiroth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. 10. And there's an 11th one here. What does this one do to?
This is the extra one there.
Oh, that one's the extra one? Okay.
That really shouldn't be there, but it's another one.
Okay. So let's start with this chant. It's only going to be a minute, so here we go. Can you hear it, Bruce?
Yeah.
Okay. Oops, wait on. I got to kill it just a sec.
Talk about a mood.
That's what I hate about this.
You could just close the whole thing, I think.
How do I get out of this here?
Go up there.
And now I can close it. Let's see. Where?
The red arrow.
Here we go. Yeah, here. I'll keep it because I'll send out the link to this when I send out the recording. So, okay. So let's go back to.
There was the article we found on Ose Shalom.
Right. So where's that?
I don't know. This is the.
You guys are great fun.
Is it?
There it is.
Is this it?
Yes, that's it, darling.
Here we go. Here it is. This is something you can just read, but yeah, I'll have to send this out too.
I was going to say maybe we can send it out, but.
Do you want to?
I just wanted to share a bit of what that really means. I personally love the way she works with the Om, with Shalom, and that's the Hebrew word for peace. So the meaning of this particular prayer, it's a prayer for peace. Our Father in heaven, which they don't mean literally, they don't take that literally, but our Father in heaven, we pray today that you shelter your world with peace. all of the great religions turn to you during these fateful years of religious extremism, nuclear proliferation, social injustice, and even genocide. In the Jewish tradition, we pray, Oseh Shalom. I don't want to butcher.
Memoraf. Bemromaf. Hu Yaseh. Shalom Aleinu Valkol Israel.
It's a very reminiscent of the Shema, the prayer of the Shema. He who makes peace from above, may he make peace upon us and all of Israel. And if I may be so bold, I'll call
Yoshvei Tevel
unto all inhabitants of your holy abode. And let's go down to the very end. We'll send this out.
Is it
the next page?
Next page.
Yes, we still desire to know your truth, but a higher truth, a truth that is informed by a desire to know you in all your myriad ways and to experience your divine presence among all holy people. We desire this today because we desire shalom, peace and fullness. For only then will your full glory be observed, and humanity will yearn to sit under the messianic canopy of peace. Only when we recognize the divine in each other can we hope to recognize the divine at all. May this be your will, and may our collective work be blessed in the service of all humanity.
Okay.
Right.
So now let's try.
So I like the mystical sense of oneness of that.
So this is our talk. Some of this is taken from Wikipedia. There's a website called energyandvibration.com. And then there's some references to Kabbalah websites. There's a lot of material on the web. So this is a survey. That's why it's called an introduction to Kabbalah. Tree of Life is here, and the abstract Tree of Life is over here.
From our painter friend.
Yeah, Richard Stoddard did this.
That painting is like 4 or 5 feet tall. And I turned a corner in a gallery in Vermont, and I was standing right under it. And instinctually, I said, oh, that's Kabbalah. And it was just, to me, really kind of fascinating that it's in this gallery in the middle of the woods in Vermont. And then as I turned around, I saw a whole series of his paintings, many of which had Buddhist subtext, but a whole bunch were Kabbalistic, and it was more conventional in the other. This we've talked about it a couple of times, but here you can see these upper 3 sephira are called the 3 supernals, and those are up here, and they're said to be so high that they're in the realm of the absolute. You don't start to get down to manifestation from the oneness till this point. And you don't really have, this is sort of like the planning stages of it being reduced from the absolute oneness down into particularity and dimensionality. And that doesn't happen until this very last one, which represents Earth. So if you want to have a chair, you start with the archetype of a chair, and then you have to define the limitations. Is it going to be a rocking chair? Is it going to be an easy chair? Is it going to be a ladder back chair? Is it going to be upholstered? As you make these decisions, you're eliminating potential and you have to do that in order to actualize one particular option of all the options. So it's a process of division and subtraction rather than addition. You're subtracting from the oneness.
If you look on the web, people will say, well, these represent different vibrational levels. So the ones that are at the very top here, these are where the Buddha, this is where Jesus of Nazareth, they were resonating up here. And then as you drop down, you get to be more and more material, less and less enlightened, until you get down to where we're at here.
But the idea is to integrate the two and the two levels in the center. It's not like you're going to climb up this ladder, although some Western teachings do say that. But then you're just bringing up your baggage, up into your identification with these higher levels. The idea is to synthesize it here in the center. And even that sort of above our everyday consciousness. So if you're not grounded, though, you're just going to be floating up and away. And if you're just too grounded, you're not going to be open enough to bring down from above. So the idea is to be centered left and right and above and below.
Which is what the Buddha and Jesus of Nazareth achieved. That's what they lived. The Kabbalah is, again, been around for millennia. It's only been put to writing in the 300, 400 AD and the Middle Ages.
Yeah, it was really medieval Kabbalah that was really codified as what's recognized now as Kabbalah. So that was really a process then. When they started to write it down, they would be horrified to see it on the web and everything now.
Right.
Really because of the Jewish teaching about idolatry. So they're very wary of images. So this is kind of
an image.
It's definitely an image, but you're not supposed to worship it. You're supposed to meditate on it, but you're not supposed to deify it or put it above yourself. It's just kind of like a diagram of how everything works in the macrocosm and the microcosm of ourselves.
Yeah. Another thing that I found interesting was, Hinduism believed in reincarnation, and the Buddha taught this, and so does Kabbalah. That you incarnate and then disincarnate and then reincarnate, and you're here and you grow and you learn in each of these lives that you live. So let's see what's going on. Here we go. So what is Kabbalah? Kabbalah is essentially a way of viewing the world and a way of living in the world. The tree of life is a blueprint of the organizational structure of all life, both seen and unseen. So this includes not only our physical Earth and all of its parts, our solar system, our galaxy and universe, but all of the common Kabbalah tree of life as placed on Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. I didn't paste a Vitruvian Man here, but I'll go do that before I send this thing out. So the Vitruvian Man is this picture where he's got his arms out and his legs out, and you can actually see the
Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah, but you see also the
ratio.
The zodiac I think is what's placed around it. I think.
I don't think that's.
But anyway, so this is very symbolic, or has a lot of metaphor that goes with it. It's both the macrocosm of the space and time that you live in, but it also is the microcosm. So as above, down below, it mirrors. There's behavior that happens all across these things, we're born from nothingness, we return to nothingness, and our trip, our voyage, is mapped out in this tree of life. So this is,
and there isn't just like one Kabbalah or one Judaism, and there's a lot of different interpretations and traditions, and there's very traditional Jewish Kabbalah, which is a lineage that's really preserved by the Hasidic group, and then the next sort of versed in traditional Jewish Kabbalah is the Orthodox, but there's renewal Judaism happening now too, where they're far more open and spiritual, and that the woman who made that CD, it would definitely be considered in the renewal tradition. They're reviving the ancient ways, but reinterpreting them and borrowing from other traditions, such as, Hinduism and kirtan practices. But it's very much alive in Israel, and the artist who made that CD is from Israel.
right.
But there's no single monolith of, any more than there's one teaching of Buddhism or Christianity. There isn't one teaching of Kabbalah, and there's also other versions of it. There's Christian Kabbalah, and I usually see spelled with the Cabalh, and then there's also the Western Esoteric tradition, like the Freemasons. They borrow a lot, and they learn Kabbalah with a Q and one B. So my teacher embraced both, and so he spelled it Kabbalah with a Q and two B's, because he was trying to bring in more of the traditional Hebrew teachings and concepts, and intermix them with the Western esoteric version, which is absolutely, positively, definitely what the tarot came out of. But it's about the unity of the universe. And that's why the tarot even works, because it's tapping into this kind of diagram of the unity, of the complexity of the unity. It's not just this, I say, this one blob of mayonnaise. It's very differentiated. We have atoms, we have cells, we have, these various levels of complexity and interrelationship.
So let's get into this. Here we have both the K and the Q, two B's here, one B here. But this is an esoteric method, discipline, school of thought, and Jewish mysticism. This is, there's a lot of evidence suggests that this is how Jesus of Nazareth was raised as a Jew in this tradition.
And particularly as an Essene.
And the Essenes were the keepers of this. So a traditional Kabbalist is called the Mekubal, or receiver, and the definition varies according to tradition and the aims of those following it. There's medieval Judaism, and then there's Western esotericism, which is what Marjorie was talking about. So there's a Christian Kabbalah, there's a Hermetic Kabbalah.
But that should be spelled with the C.
This one here should be spelled with a C, the Christian one. And so we're trying to explore here the relationship between the unchanging internal God, which is called the mysterious Ein Sof, the infinite.
That's really what it means. The endless, or without end, is the
Right.
literal translation. And that's the oneness, the absolute.
And the mortal finite universe, which is God's creation. So it forms the foundation of mystical religious interpretation within Judaism. Actually, Marjorie prodded me about this discussion on infinite. So we had a German mathematician, Georg Cantor, who decided to go study the infinite, and so he studied it, and he said, well, let's start with the integers, and the integers go, 1, 2, 3, 4 on up forever. So there's a joke that goes with this, which was that there's a hotel, and you go to the hotel, and the hotel has rooms numbered, like I just said, 1, 2, 3, 4 on up forever. But there's always a room in the hotel, because what you do is, if you say, well, I like to go into room 1, then everybody else goes one room over. They go, who's in room 1 goes to room 2, to room 3. There's always room. So then you can get a room at the hotel. And this leads to the notion of, this type of infinity, where you would put things in a one-to-one correspondence with the integers. So I'd say, well, how many even integers are there? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Well, I can put them in a one-to-one correspondence. I can put the 1 with the 2, the 2 with the 4, the 3 with the 6. They're just multiples of 2 of one another. So the number of even integers is infinite. But we can see that the number of even integers is half of all the integers. So how could you take half of something and not have it come out to be half? There's as many in the half in the even integers as there are in all the integers. Okay, it just leads you to these conundrums of what is infinity. Now, what
You can fit it all in here, right? Because
Yeah.
you're always dividing. You can always
Yeah.
go smaller and smaller. So you can always cut it in half, and there's always more room. Right here is infinite.
Right. So what Cantor did was he said, well, I wonder, now that that's what we've got nailed down for, he actually called this Aleph sub null. Okay, Aleph being the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and null meaning it's the 0th order infinity. It's the simplest infinity he could possibly find. There it is. So then he said, well, let's do something different. Let's look at the real numbers, okay? So the real numbers, let's just look at the numbers between 0 and 1, the real numbers, okay? So I pick a number there, 0.12597, okay? That's a number that's there. So now the question is, can I find any other numbers that are above that or below that? Well, yeah, I just go out beyond the decimal, the last number there, and I can add any number you want, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or accordingly. So what you end up with is this conundrum that if you simply look at the real numbers, just between 0 and 1, there's more of those than there are the infinite number of integers. So he came up with a higher order of infinity, because the number of real numbers is much greater than you cannot put the real numbers into a one-to-one correspondence with the integers. Okay, any real number that I pick, and I try and match them up, I can always stick other real numbers in between. Okay, so there's no way for me to do this. So he called this Aleph sub 1. This is a higher order infinity, okay? Then the question came up, are there any orders of infinity between these two? And although it sounds crazy, no one knows. There's a lot of evidence that says, no, there aren't any orders of infinity in between these two, but it does start to show what the issues are when you talk about things being infinite, like this Ein Sof. And what comes out of this was that Georg Cantor, the mathematician, actually went insane. He had to be put in an insane asylum because he kept thinking about this stuff, and it just drove him crazy.
And that's why there's generally a strictly enforced rule against studying Kabbalah until you're 40 years old and married. And They want you to be grounded and developed enough to be able to handle it.
The concepts are very destabilizing. If you're young, you might lose, like Cantor, lose your marbles, and you start thinking about these things. So,
well, his name is the Hebrew word for the chanter in the synagogue, who's really kind of clergy.
So, yeah, I don't know if Cantor was Jewish.
I thought he was.
I don't know. I don't know. So, okay, so now plugging ahead here, what is Kabbalah? There was a transmission of sacred texts, and they used classical Jewish scriptures to explain and demonstrate mystical teachings. And these teachings were held by the Kabbalists to define the inner meaning of both the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, and the traditional rabbinic literature, the Talmud. And they have these concealed dimensions here that we're talking about, which Ron Cowan observed, as well as to explain the significance of Jewish religious observances. So
most people have no idea why they light 2 candles on the Sabbath Eve, and it's to actually celebrate the breakthrough that they attribute to the divine of duality. Because if everything remains in the oneness, it's the same as nothingness. It's everything is one. That means there's no thing, there's no thingness, nothing can exist without the illusion of the duality. So you want to celebrate that duality as the beginning of the interplay. It's the play of the universe that is only possible because of that the Simpson that we talked about.
Now, one of the things to keep in mind here is that no one really knows where this first came from, but they think that it's as old as any religion that we're aware of. Like Hinduism is viewed as one of the oldest, but this could be older. No one knows. And this gave the blueprint for the philosophy of creation and everything that came with this, in terms of all the human institutions that came up, including sciences and arts and so forth. But a lot of this stuff was written down in the Middle Ages in Spain and southern France. There was a huge renaissance of activity here. And the only problem with this was that the Jews' reward for doing this was that Queen Isabella ostracized them. They had to all leave Spain. But anyway, there was also a renaissance in the 16th century in Palestine with the Ottoman Empire. And the foundational text of the Kabbalah, the Zohar, was actually just written down in the late 13th century. So there's no way that this could be contemporary. They wrote it down, but it's entirely oral up to this point in time.
And still, most of the actual teachings are.
Right.
You're only seeing like the skeleton when you read a text.
Yeah.
You really are supposed to have it interpreted by a live teacher who knows it, and so much of it is energetic. It's an energy transmission.
Which is why you have to be at least 40 years old and married to be able to handle this. So Isaac Luria was a seminal figure in this and did a lot of popularizing these ideas in the form of Hasidic Judaism. And in the 20th century, the interest in the Kabbalistic texts inspired this development of research on the Kabbalah and in the whole field of Judaism. But it's still, if you know, we have, for example, this couple in our church that are practicing Jews, and I asked them what about Kabbalah, and they said we don't know anything about that. We just practice. There's all of the things with diet, with the food being kosher, and all of these things. They practice all of that. There's something like 600 rules that if you're a good Jew you would follow. But in terms of even thinking about this, they hadn't.
They said, "Oh, nobody does that."
Yeah, they just glossed over it as, you know, why would you want to do this? I said, well, this is the spirituality of Judaism. This is the mystic side of it. But that was me.
And that it is an explanation of where a lot of these traditions that they just follow blindly come from. And I learned to appreciate the kosher laws as a form of mindfulness. You know, you're being mindful of what you're eating. It's pretty profound when you think about it. And that you don't want to waste, it's life force energy, that you don't want to be redundant with too much. There's a kind of a hierarchy. Animal protein is higher than vegetable protein. And so they had also a lot of laws for safety because of trichinosis and, you know, things like that. So
Yeah,
there's usually more risk around eating pork than beef. Some of it had some it was somewhat about that, but I think it was also just to have these prescriptions to be aware of, so that eating was a more conscious thing. But it is a miracle. I mean, think about it, just photosynthesis happening. That's a miracle. And then being able to eat and digest and remove the waste is an incredible design. And if you're paying attention, it becomes really psychedelic. And so I think they wanted people to have an awareness of the gift of life and what it means to take a life for another being, to sacrifice its life. It's a kind of mindfulness practice.
What happened was a lot of these things have been collected together. So the Zohar was viewed as the principal book of Kabbalah, but there are these other things, the Bahir, the Pardes, Rimanoim, and this it says Ein Sof. I guess it's Etz Chaim, which kind of sounds like Ein Sof, I guess.
They say end soft,
And Ein Sof, yeah. It's not German.
but it means without end.
Right. And then there are these other early writings, this in particular, the Sefer Yetzirah, which is a very short few pages. Sefer Yetzirah, which was written centuries before any of these medieval things. These are all written in the Middle Ages. And it was understood as a kind of a prelude to the whole canon of Kabbalah. So this is the Cliff Notes version of what's going on. So according to the Zohar, Torah study can proceed along 4 levels of interpretation, and they're called Pardes. Is that how you pronounce this? Pardes, from their initial, so PRDS. If you look at the 4 things here, PRDS. Peshat, the direct interpretation of meaning. Remez, the allegoric meanings through allusion. Darash, meaning midrash, often all kinds of imaginative comparisons. And Sod, the inner esoteric or metaphysical meanings that you come up with. So these are the 4 levels, getting more and more. The direct one is here, and we get more and more esoteric as we progress here. So this is considered a necessary part of study of Torah, but every Jew that's observant should be studying these things. But as we saw, that's not the case. So,
Well, there's so many forms of Judaism at this point.
right. Yeah, our town of Westport has 3 synagogues. One is Orthodox, one is, I would say, very modern Reform, and the other one is kind of in between the two. And that's for a town of 25,000. So three synagogues. Go figure. And they're totally different. The one that's
They're as different as Judaism as well in a way, but as Catholicism and Protestantism.
Yeah, the Reform one that's next to our Unitarian activity has over 600 families in it, and the first Friday of the month is they welcome newcomers. So they have a huge number of turnover of kids joining and families joining, and then they leave, they move out of the area. So the first Friday they always welcome people, and we went to this, and the rabbi was there on lead guitar. Okay, the cantor was there on the keyboards, and he also had a boombox, and the assistant rabbi played bass guitar, and they went ahead and went through the standard service, but playing it with these guitars and percussion, and the older people were happy with this. That's why they're there. If you were Orthodox, you'd be horrified to see this, but that was what went on. They would read again pieces of the Torah, whatever it was for that month. So,
and they're as liberal as Unitarians in a lot of ways. They invited Martin Luther King to speak there in the 60s.
Yeah.
And the whole place was filled to capacity, which is,
it's a big building. They can, if they figure it out, if they can cram 600 people, 600 families in for a service, you figure out how big.
I think they can fit 1,000.
Yeah. So the modern study of Jewish mysticism reserves the term Kabbalah to designate the particular distinctive doctrines that textually emerged fully in the Middle Ages, but they were the earlier Merkabah, mystical concepts and methods, and these go back into the mists of time. No one knows, thousands of years back in time.
But that is in the quote unquote Old Testament, Merkabah. It means chariot, and that's a lot of what Ezekiel's vision was of this chariot, which is like they're trying to describe an interdimensional vehicle.
Yeah, it's called a flying saucer.
Right.
Ezekiel saw a flying saucer, but since they didn't have any word for flying saucer, he called it a chariot.
And it's going between the dimensions, and they're trying to kind of represent that in their words, and they're saying the 4 cherubim, those are the angels of the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac and the 4 directions. The 4 gospels are correlated with that in Christianity. And they're saying, well, that these beings were turning and not turning. They're trying to use all this paradoxical language to capture this. It's really kind of a psychedelic vision.
Probably the flying saucer shifted dimensions. It changed its vibration and moved up in dimensions and just disappeared in front of them. So now what do you do?
Or they might have gotten a ride in it.
Yeah, no, Ezekiel probably did get a ride. So the other thing that you have here is the magical aims of practical Kabbalah. So Moshe Idel writes that the three basic models can be discerned operating and competing through the whole history of Jewish mysticism, just not simply in the Middle Ages, but the whole time. That's what we have here, and the problem is to describe this in any meaningful way. We'll see. The theosophical tradition seeks to understand and describe the divine realm using imagination and mythic symbols of human psychological experience. So as an intuitive conceptual alternative to rationalist Jewish philosophy, particularly Maimonides, the speculation became the central stream of Kabbalah and the usual reference of the term. And the theosophy implies the innate, centrally important influence of human conduct, redeeming or damaging the spiritual realms, as man is a divine microcosm and the spiritual realms are the divine macrocosm. And the purpose of all of this was to give the whole of normative Jewish religious practices this mystical, metaphysical meaning. So
they may not know what they're doing, but they're repeating the rituals that are, like lighting the 2 candles on the Sabbath Eve, which is Friday night. Most people have no idea why they're doing that. And as I said, it's a celebration of the illusion of duality, because that's where the interplay happens. So it's actually a kind of gratitude for the Simsum, which we'll get to.
yeah, we'll get to the Simsum. So there's a meditative side where you try and achieve a mystical union with God in this active intellect. It appears to be through meditation. Okay. The prophetic Kabbalah was the supreme example of this. And then there's meditation built on the philosophy of Maimonides, but he was opposed to what happened with the Kabbalists. Okay. Then there's yet another tradition which is of course based on unpublished manuscripts that go through this harmonizing heavenly force, and it involves white magic, and was censored by the hardcore Kabbalists only for those completely pure of intent, because otherwise you would be dragged down into the lower realms where purity and impurity are mixed, and that would be the end of you. So here we have a pretty opaque description of what they think is going on here. Practical Kabbalah was prohibited until the temple in Jerusalem, which was torn down in 70 AD when the Romans went in and flattened everything and sold everybody into slavery. So the temple has to be rebuilt, and then you'll have this purification taking place. So another side to this thing is it's hard to clarify with any degree of certainty what are the concepts within the Kabbalah. I think that says it all. Okay, that that's one reason why this thing appears to be so muddled is because even the people that do it argue among themselves about what the concepts are. Different schools of thought, different outlooks, all of them are accepted as correct, and so it goes.
They have a saying that everyone is on their own tree. So imagine that.
Yeah, you have your own tree of life for everybody. And so this can only be understood intuitively, is what's going on here. I would argue that we just haven't evolved enough. And if we did evolve enough, we would be enlightened enough to be able to understand this. But right now, we're too far down in being able to understand this.
They would maintain it. It takes years and years and years of study and practice.
But you look at the Buddha, you look at Jesus of Nazareth, and I think they achieved this. It did take them years, but they attained the levels that they're talking about here. But they were exceptional. I'm sure there's a lot of people who would never make it. They would try till they're blue in the face and not make it. So according to the traditional understanding, Kabbalah dates from the Garden of Eden. So that they're trying to go into Genesis or go into, the earliest that they could come up with. But since they go through this notion of Simsung, which is the creation of the universe, I'm surprised it didn't say it went back to the start of the universe. So there's, one should not teach the work of creation in pairs, nor the work of the chariot to an individual unless he is wise, can understand the implications himself. Again, no one is being taught what's going on here, but they all believe there's something here.
But they're still referring to it as the work of the chariot, and that's the Kabbalah mysticism.
Right.
We really need visuals for all of this.
Yeah. There's an oral Torah, which was given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. The guess is in the 13th century BCE, but some believe that the Kabbalah began with Adam. So again, we have this contradiction. It really doesn't matter. It goes so far back. It's been there forever, and so it goes. Let's skip over this. Here's this. What did you call this? Merkaba.
Merkaba.
This.
There's different. It's sometimes a V is a B.
Okay.
In the transliteration from Hebrew to English, but
right. So this.
I think of it as Kabbalah mysticism.
Right. This is encrypted knowledge, and there's meditation methods in the book of the prophet Ezekiel when he was talking about his divine chariot. There's also this other Breshit mysticism, referring to the first chapter of Genesis. And then there's other terms that come up early on. So
we spent a year reading Genesis in Kabbalah class every week. It was fascinating.
Yeah.
And it was just a completely different level from what we read in Sunday school. So it doesn't really make sense without that dimension.
Right.
And once you have that dimension, it's incredible. And it's an incredibly rich and beautiful and meaningful spirituality that's being expressed with these metaphors.
Right. So here's an attempt now to just deal with these metaphors. There's a journey here. When we go through this tree of life, every one of us follows a path. During the journey, we travel this road anywhere between polar opposites. So there's positives and negatives, excessives and deficiencies, highs and lows, light and dark. So the key to the journey is not to get stuck in any one place, but to be fluid and at the same time learn the value of that dynamic process between the extremes of life. So you try and find the middle way, you try and balance all these things out to get a neutral path while still experiencing these extremes. So you're trying to find the spoke of the wheel, the hub of the wheel, and the spokes are what comes out of that. And you want to just stay there and have things whirl around you rather than go out on the edge of the wheel and get dizzy and bumped all over the place.
Can we go to the first page? And can you come back here easily? You already know what page it is? But I just want to show this image of the tree, if I can point to that. The path of return that is from the human level ascending. First, the divine is in unity before it differentiates on its way down the tree here. And that's usually depicted as a bolt of lightning descending. And then the path of return is a serpent going through each of these. It comes down through the dots, which are the sephira, the spheres. And the path of return for the serpent is entwined through every one of these connecting paths. And that's, I'm sorry. That's the human individual. See if we can turn it off. Path from the physical planes rising to the divine level through each one of these developmental stages. But the tree is said to depict these three pillars. The left side is severity, the right side is merit, mercy. But the human path is to not go too far in one direction or the other, but to find the center, as we said. So if you're always merciful, you could be walked all over, and that's not really the point. But if you're too severe, you're never going to have any compassion for anybody, including yourself. And that's not really the point of incarnation. It's to grow and to find the balance. But the middle pillar is the honey spot of development. And you know, as I said, you're not trying to get back to your God state, because that would defeat the purpose of incarnating in the first place. The purpose of incarnating is to grow, is to be in an individual body with an individual brain and mind and experience. And you want to meet the absolute from above in the center, top and bottom as well. And this is said to be Christ consciousness in Christian Kabbalah. That's what it represents. And Tiferet is all about balance. It's not ascending this ladder to this top. We're not supposed to be even aspiring to that. This is the ego right here, which is nothing terrible at all. You know, you don't want to identify with it. You're really the whole tree, but it's sort of your vehicle. It's how you perceive. And this represents your physical body. That's your physical vehicle. The ego is the lower manifestation of the divine spark, which is at the top. You don't want to negate it. You don't need to abandon it or suppress it or reject it. You just don't want to identify with it. You're really all of this. And there's different levels to this. This can represent the totality of the solar system. Each planet is represented here. The outer three are kind of combined up here. But the idea is the synthesis, and that really occurs in this, what they call the 11th Sephirah, which is hidden, is Da. But for most common purposes, it's here, which is the heart. It's somewhere between the solar plexus and the heart chakra on my brain. The Hindu model of manifestation. This is sort of describing, as I say, like the step down unit of coming from this absolutism. First, you need a concept of a chair, and then you narrow down what kind of chair is it going to be. But we're really kind of experiencing here in the ego, but this is the intellect and this is desire. And those are said to be the two cherubim of the Ark of the Covenant. They're necessary. We can't do anything without them. So this is kind of where it all happens on a human level, with our feet down here. And you can't do this, as they say, without your feet on the ground. So you don't want to be still in your most ambitious stages of your career. You want that to be kind of behind you. It's really designed for men. They're supposed to be married and stable and, hopefully have children by the time they're 40. And then they have the maturity and the leisure without being irresponsible to pursue these higher things. But you want to synthesize it here. If you can go from here to here, you're doing really well. And then you want to leave that up there, but bring it down you want to be able to receive it, but you don't want to try to climb up there because you would disappear into the ethers if that was your aspiration. That's kind of like Icarus flying too close to the sun, which is, representing, I was going to say chutzpah. What's the term?
Hubris.
Hubris, exactly. Thank you. So.
The other thing this gets across that Margie pointed out is that someone like Jesus of Nazareth or the Buddha, they were clearly higher up here, but they're entities that are even more powerful that are up here that they interact with and draw upon. That it's inconceivable to us because we're way down here as to what in the world is possibly coming out of them. But they're in these realms that are you can only imagine what in the world's going on.
But the people who do try to ascend to that height usually do burn out. They usually do go nuts.
Yeah. Now they have no idea. So let's skip back ahead here to. This is what we just covered here.
The goal is to maintain a neutral path.
Right.
Well, you want to experience the divine, but you don't want to go up there. Because you do still, there are yogis who disappear into caves for years and years at a time and apparently go for years at times without eating or drinking. That's right. a Hindu.
They don't eat, they don't drink, they don't sleep.
Tradition.
Yeah.
But does every householder need to do that? I don't think so.
No. So, there was a lot of, mysticism in the Torah. What we have here in Genesis, the discussions about God himself, the true nature of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the interaction of all these entities with the serpent, where in the world did the serpent come from, and so forth. And so there's all kinds of metaphors, myths, mystical speculations that occur here. We touched on Ezekiel.
But really the whole adventure was triggered when Eve really initiated Adam with the apple or the pomegranate into this game of interplay between the above and below, because when you're just in paradise, nothing's happening. You're just floating around in bliss, which I'm sure is very pleasant, but you're not really learning. So until the fall happened, that's really esoterically celebrated. Until the fall happened, there was no potential for growth. And that was the separation from the divine. And so that's what the tree of life is, the Kabbalah. That's what
Right.
the teaching is, that it was an initiation.
Right.
And we could say that, potentially about all of our falls from grace. When we venture out of the the nursery into the adventure of life, it's often really painful, and that's said to even apply to the exile of the Jews when they were in Egypt, and then the return. But that it was for a purpose, and
Right.
it's to grow. It's not meaningless. It's not just like a mistake. It's a really important initiation that you wouldn't grow without.
There are these other mystical events they talked about. We had Jacob with his vision of this ladder. And again, I think there's a ladder there because they couldn't conceive of how in the world to do this. How else would you get up high, get on the ladder? What else would you do? Well, they could very well have done things like simply levitated up there. But what are you levitating on? Moses saw this burning bush which didn't exhaust itself, and yet when he asked, "Who are you?" his answer was, "I am who I am." So there was this aversion to talking about the name of God that appeared here, which leads to, again, another element of mysticism.
Well, to refer to God as a personage is idolatry. The Jews are non-deist in that sense, even
Right.
the everyday Jews. I almost said secular Jews, and that's really how I kind of think it's not the average person sitting in a synagogue. Sorry to say, they're not having the mystical experience.
So when Moses went up to get the commandments, they immediately built this golden calf and were worshiping it.
Right. And that was reverting to the age of Taurus.
Right.
Actually, which was a problem because it was recidivism. It wasn't just
Right.
it was the wrong idol. It's not just that it was an idol.
Right. So the Kabbalists came up with two aspects to God: this transcendent, unknowable, limitless, divine, simple but beyond revelation God, and then this God in manifestation, which is revealed through what he creates and sustains and relates to humankind. So two very different things. Of course, the first one, you can't express anything about it, but that's what it is. That's why they wanted something concrete. But the first is this Ein Sof notion that there is no end, nothing can be grasped. The second is accessible to human perception, but it only reveals part of the divine. And they're not contradictory, but they complement one another. And so it goes. So
that reminds me of the Christian teachings about
Yeah.
the Trinity.
Yeah. Skip over this.
Oh, go back. Please.
What happened here?
I like that the Ein Sof itself is too sublime to be referred to directly in the Torah.
Right.
And that is, they do have this thing against naming God. They often write God with a blank for the O, out of that deference to the unnameable.
Or they put YVH, so
Right.
they don't say Yahweh, but they just write YVH. So the name, there is no name there.
So it does describe, though, God speaking in the first person, most memorably with the first word of the Ten Commandments, a reference without any description or name to the simple divine essence, termed also Atmos and soft, essence of the infinite, beyond even the duality of infinitude and finitude. In contrast, the term and soft describes the Godhead as the infinite life force, first cause, continuously keeping all creation in existence. And that's another thing. The story of the creation isn't about some time in the past. And some Orthodox Jews and Christians will say, oh, that was, whatever, 5,000 years ago. I mean, they have some notion of that. It's continual. It's always unfolding. It's timeless. It's beyond time. But it's unfolding in every moment and between every two moments. And it's multidimensional. It's infinite. So every potential is evolving in some way into and out of existence through this tree, that each sephira on the tree includes a tree. That's another way that it's infinite. And they go extend up and down, as well, and out to, that. So it's a grid more than that's just like one segment of it. But it repeats in a holographic way. That's the word I've been kind of groping for. It's a holographic vision. It's not linear.
Right. Yeah. One of the things about a hologram is if you take any piece of the hologram, you can create everything out of that one piece.
Right. And in that way, it's kind of like deer is met in the Hindu tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And that each node has an all-seeing eye. And each node, and they say that it's kind of like the internet is becoming that. Because of that, each hub on the internet is its own infinite realm of manifestation of the rest. And we can now, Google is like this amazing tool to get around this universe.
This is an attempt in the Zohar to talk about what happened at the beginning, the first words in Genesis, with the Ein Sof created Elohim, which is God's manifestation in creation.
That's in the Shema is the key Hebrew prayer, and it's in the translation of the story of Genesis. And the word Elohim in Hebrew is feminine and plural. So it's kind of like this committee of feminine divine entities that form this panel, to create by committee according to the vision of the ultimate divine, but it's part of the step down process to physicality.
So there's many descriptions that go with this. So we have Sephirot, the divine attributes, and Partsufim, the divine faces. We have the attributes and the faces. We have the or, the spiritual light and flow. We have the names of God and the supernal Torah. We have Olamat, the spiritual worlds. We have a divine tree, an archetypal man. We have an angelic chariot and palaces. We have male and female. We have enclosed layers of reality. And we have inwardly holy vitality and external
Kalipo shells.
Kelly.
They're like the shell of the walnut, and the essence
Right.
is considered to be the nut, the kernel is the term that they use.
And then we have these 613 channels, which are these rules that most Jews attempt to follow.
But they don't know why.
But yeah, and then we have the divine souls of man. So all of these things here, you know, the metaphors that go with this lead to the mysticism that makes up the Kabbalah.
I just love the fact that they
but
even
they're-
call these things attributes and emanations,
That they're going for anthropomorphic symbolism,
right?
and then but then they're looking for psychological terms and mystical or divine terms, and then of course then they debate it all with what's going on. So the symbolism touches but does not touch.
Right.
The typical thing.
I think of that the Sistine Chapel with the
Uh,
finger of God, and the pointing down, and the finger of Adam reaching up.
Right.
They don't quite touch.
Right.
There's a synapse there that has to be
Right.
crossed.
So then we have the Sephiroth, the 10 emanations and attributes of God,
Which
Which we-
correspond to the 10 Commandments.
Yeah. And we have the Zohar and these other texts that we touched on the emergence of the Sephiroth from the state of concealed potential in Ein Sof. And then we have someone like Moses ben Jacob Cordovero, who described how God emanated the myriad details of finite reality out of the absolute unity of divine light via these 10 Sephiroth, or vessels. And remember, it looks like that these are really, these are the dimensions that Ron Cowan looked at when he was dealing with looking in the microcosm.
I think that's true.
And the
whole thing is very prismatic. And we used the word earlier, the like fractals, and
yeah, they're fractals, but they're also just, you end up in these higher realms being able to conceive of things that are literally inconceivable as you drop down into these lower realms. And what things become obvious there that are not at all obvious when you're every level that you go down. So
it's right. It's more and more limited
Yeah.
as we come down the tree.
Yeah.
But at the top of the tree is just pure potential, which is another way of saying nothingness.
right.
If you want any kind of actualization, you
There's
have
some,
to have that step down.
well, there's something there, but we're not capable of conceiving what it is. It's so we
Not
call
in
it
this
nothingness, but it could
In
be
this dimension.
something so far beyond anything that we can conceive of that's the way it goes. So
And each the top Sephirah is called the crown, just as in Hinduism, and that's Keter. Each Keter is the Malkut of the level above it. So you're never done. each time you achieve a certain degree of enlightenment, it's only on one level. Then there's the next level immediately, overlapping with. So the crowning achievement of one is the foundation of the next.
Right. Yeah, and it looks like there's many transitional levels too, that just small changes in vibration can lead to, reaching things you couldn't reach any other way, is all I would say. There's this discussion of righteous humans that are ascending these 10 Sephiroth, doing righteous actions, and so it goes. These are things that are, I mean, they're trying to attach words to these things, but I don't think that you're able to conceive of what's going on here. So the real human actions are the foundation of the Yesod of this universe, Malchut. And these actions must accompany the conscious intention of compassion. So you have to have compassionate actions, but that's impossible without faith. Emunah, which is the meaning to trust that God always supports these compassionate actions, even when God seems to be hidden. This is the story we saw in the book of Job, where Job thought he was abandoned, God was hidden. So ultimately, it's necessary to show compassion towards oneself as well, in order to share compassion with others. And the selfish enjoyment of God's blessings is only there in order to empower one to assist others, and is considered a kind of a golden mean, the adornment, or the tiferet, being part of the middle column. Tiferet. Okay.
That's what I was talking about before.
Right. So that takes us to this Partzufim, which is the most esoteric section of the classic Zohar. These are divine persona that displace the Sephiroth, that are manifestations of God. So there's anthropomorphic symbolic personalities, and these are, again, placed at the center of our existence, and so it goes. So the parts of symbols relate to Jungian archetypes of the collective unconscious, and they reflect a psychological progression from youth to sage in therapeutic healing, going all the way to Ein Sof, this unconscious, as Kabbalah is simultaneously both theology and psychology. So
that is true.
You get everything. And then the medieval Kabbalists talked about descending, which we touched on here. I'm going to skip over this. And the Hasidim thought that holding God, by holding that divine immanence of the Kabbalah, holding that God is all that really exists, everything else is completely undifferentiated.
From the perspective of the divine.
Right.
But that's why the divine needs our individual consciousnesses in order to perceive itself in a way.
Right. So we have this paradox here, but this is an attempt to resolve it.
But
go ahead.
I thought that was a really interesting phrase. This view can be defined as a cosmic monistic pantheism, which I would agree with. According to this philosophy, God exists God's existence is higher than anything that this world can express. Yet, I would say it includes all things in this world within its divine reality and perfect unity, so that the creation affected no change within the divine
Right.
at all. It's just an artificial state of separation, but that's kind of a pulsing.
The creation is going to evolve now,
Right.
and so that will affect change.
And it's like the universe breathing. It's expanding out into these minute particles, but then it's contracting back into itself. And so that's part of the simsum and the cycle of the creation. That's what it's talking about. It's not talking about a man on a chair in a laboratory or an alchemical,
Yeah.
ritual doing this on a table somewhere. It's saying it's coming out of itself. It's unfolding from itself.
Right.
And coming back.
And but then this leads to change.
Right. Each time it does that, there's more consciousness. But what I like especially about the Hebrew teaching is that the divine needs us.
Right.
It needs this differentiation in order to not just be static in this blob of mayonnaise. It needs this apparent separation, this differentiation, so that it can sense itself and perceive itself and learn and grow. Otherwise, it's got absolutely nothing to do.
Right.
And there's no beauty, there's no love, there's no
nothing. There's no
right.
This is a bootstrapping process.
I love that last sentence. This paradox is seen from dual human and divine perspectives. It's dealt with at length in Chabad texts. And you can just, I find it incredibly poetic and beautiful and rich and meaningful. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. So we have the nature and the origin of evil. So if God contains everything, then where in the world does this evil come from? Evil is a quality of God. It had to be there. But if that's the case, then God apparently needs evil to be what it is, to exist. And this led to all kinds of discussions, as you could imagine. The root of evil is found within the 10 holy Sephiroth through an imbalance. The power of the strength and judgment and severity. So in this sense, evil is not, it's there, but it's really, you've diverged too far. You've gone to the left side or the right side, and you haven't stayed in the middle, which is where you should be. So in that sense, evil is not.
And you should be synthesizing both. It's not about escaping or avoiding the extremes. It's having them there to an extent, at least potentially.
Right.
But balancing them consciously.
Right. Yeah. Then there's this other discussion here, going through evil. This thing I didn't like as much. There's a tree of death. They're looking around. A lot of these things just appeared out of nowhere.
Well, you never know what was oral, and then all of a sudden written down.
Yeah. So I just put this in here for sake of completeness, because it contains a lot of things that literally don't show up anywhere else. Okay. So you can look at it. So what in the world is the role of humankind in doing this? So apparently humans have the central role in creation, But the soul and the body correspond to supernal divine manifestations, the soul and the body. And so this scheme was universalized to describe the harmony of creation within man. In Judaism, it led to a profound spiritualization of Jewish practice. It gave a radically innovative, conceptually continuous development of mainstream Talmudic and midrashic rabbinic notions, but the thought underscored and invigorated the more conservative Jewish observances. And so the esoteric teachings gave the external mitzvah observances.
That means good deeds.
Good deeds here. The central role in spiritual creation, whether the practitioner was learning this knowledge or not. And so it had a huge impact on Judaism as a result.
Whether they know it or not,
Yeah.
it informs the exoteric teachings and practices.
Yeah. And many of these Kabbalists were key movers and shakers in society. So the other thing to keep in mind is this role of harmonizing this divine flow, uniting the masculine and the feminine. And within this, the divine feminine presence in this world is drawn from exile into the Holy One above. You know,
this is one of the most beautiful concepts in Kabbalah, is that the divine feminine is hidden in the final Sephirah is Malkut, which is physicality. She's hidden in the atoms. And the job of humans, particularly Jewish humans in their teaching, is to raise the Shekinah. That's what they call it, to remember the divine that's hidden within the mundane. And that's why you light the candles. It's to raise the Shekinah, is what they refer to it as, which is really beautiful. And so it's not supposed to be an oppressive view of the feminine at all. It's supposed to be very respectful raising. And so the women will spend, a lot of the week preparing food for that time. So then they celebrate the family together on Saturday. It's not usually supposed to be in a temple, it's in your home. The family is the ultimate commitment and the ultimate mitzvah and the ultimate act, really. And they see the best way that a man could spend the Sabbath Eve is making love to his wife and conceiving a child. That's like the ultimate human endeavor, is to conceive a child on the Sabbath Eve. That is a microcosm of the universe and of the divine that you then are nurturing into existence. And so they really revere the feminine as the means of all of this.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Let's see, Jewish mysticism.
So the rectification of the exiled divinity, that's another way of putting raising the Shekinah. It's the feminine.
Right.
It is the divine feminine that by coming to understand and appreciate and cultivate and elevate, that we will resurrect ourselves and heal the broken universe, heal the broken creation. Which I love it that they see it that way.
Right.
They see it as broken.
Yeah, there's indications that this stuff was doctored, that somebody took the original Torah, especially at the start in Genesis and other things, and that women played much more of a role, and they got written out of it. But that's there's these different levels of the soul. So we've just listed them here. So we have the animal part of the soul, which is the craving of bodies, bodily craving, sorry. The middle soul.
Well, that could be a craving of body.
Yeah. Which is the moral virtues and the ability to distinguish between good and evil. The higher soul, which separates man from all the other life forms,
including the angels,
and is related to the intellect and allows man to enjoy and benefit from the afterlife, and have some awareness of the existence and presence of God. Then we get up to the part of the soul that allows one to have an awareness of the divine force itself. And finally, the highest plane, which one can achieve as full union with God as possible. So again, someone like the Buddha or Jesus of Nazareth, we're operating up in this level, having started out down here.
But you could just, die if it was as simple as rejoining the absolute. Then
Right.
you'd go
Right.
there, right? Or some Bardo on the way. But this idea is you're bringing it down. You're rising as high as you can, which is, you're really lucky if you can get to the middle, and becoming a stable enough vehicle yourself, a vessel of the divine, to come down from above to meet in the center, where the divine needs us and we need the divine. And it's the unity and the particularity meeting in the center, so they both become more.
Right.
There's
a
unity,
union there,
right,
but they're in some sense
between the finite and the infinite.
right.
It's all, you could all just die and go back to the infinity, and then we'd all be one in it. But that would defeat the purpose of the separation in the first place, is to have the realization while we're in this body. It's to have that gap to close, to have that realization that the divine needs to understand what it's like to be a limited human being, which Jung said that's what actually Yahweh's lesson was in his encounter with Job, that the divine needed to say, well, wait a minute, I made him limited, and now I'm beating him up because he's acting in a limited way. But what's wrong with me?
Right.
And I think that's something that is a really important thing to recognize. I've had a lot of periods in my life like that, when I'm saying, well, what do you want? I'm doing my best. You made me limited. So, but then the limitations become just as much a gift to the infinite as the infinite is to us limited beings down here in the finiteness. But the infinity would just, am I making it? It's all in the interplay.
Right.
That's the point, is the incarnation in limited form, in order to have this interplay that couldn't exist if we just stayed in the oneness. If there was no incarnation, everything would be fine, right? There'd be no disharmony. Everything there would be no way to have disharmony. But if it's all just one, then so what?
Right. As near as anyone knows, this notion of reincarnation really only seemed to appear in the medieval
totally
period
disagree
in the
with
writings, but it probably was there early on. It just was taken out of whatever was written then. Is the consumption. So reincarnation really does enter popular Jewish culture from this point on. So this takes us back to the tree of life. Okay, this is a physical picture of how our experience of life is represented. The tree is the blueprint of all life. It appears as two-dimensional, but it's actually multi-dimensional. And there's lots of trees of life within trees of life, and they're all interconnected. And the warp and weft of the cloth of life is what makes things interesting. We have limited abilities to perceive beyond our physical plane of existence how vast and all-encompassing this tree of life is. Because remember, it's going into all of these 26 dimensions that we're dealing with here. This picture is very simplistic.
And the tree of life is really part of the seed of life. But even that is limited. That's still two-dimensional. Each one of these, a Western Kabbalist and tarot guy created a three-dimensional tree out of wooden spokes and spheres and painted them in their corresponding colors like this and all that, and gave it to my teacher because my teacher was admired. And he said, "Well, that was nice. I mean, he was doing it to be kind. It was a lovely gesture." And I didn't have a heart to tell him that it's a complete misrepresentation of the tree because it's not three-dimensional. It's
Right.
It's certainly not
It's
two-dimensional.
26 dimensional.
But it's infinite. It's completely it's beyond dimension.
It is, yeah. So this is the
Holographic, that was the word I couldn't think.
The map, the journey that the soul or the human experiences toward enlightened consciousness, and the picture of how nothing becomes everything, which ultimately takes us from physical matter and vice versa. The everything then becomes nothing. So this is critical to everything. In all of time, in the past, present, and future, we're somewhere in this tree of life, experiencing some moment, moving to another moment, to another place in the tree. And it's a personal journey, but everybody goes on this journey. It's a universal journey. But you understand yourself, your relationship with others, and to our planet and the cosmos around us, and to the creator of all. So it's the physical representation through each of these Sephiroth that leads to this. And you want to talk about this Keter?
Well, Keter is the crown chakra, and it's the upper Sephirot on the tree that I mentioned earlier. And it's really the same as a caduceus, or I guess the word is caduceus. It's the same. We can certainly work on images for this. That's the closest to the absolute realm in this scheme, but it's not really hierarchical. It's important to remember that Keter on one level is Malkut on the next. And they're multidimensional, and they go, horizontally, diagonally, every which way. But that is the crown of the fundamental level, and in a certain way, when you look at it as a sequential development, then Keter is the pinnacle of achievement of that level.
Right.
But coming down from the above, that's where it begins. And that's usually depicted as a white burst of light, like a star. And then coming down to earth is how we think of it, and that we conceive of our journey as going up the path toward the infinite, toward the absolute.
Right.
So returning to the source.
Right. We're bouncing around the tree of life like a pinball in an arcade game, gaining information and experience so we can make the different choices as to where we want to go next. So,
And the real thing is to always be developing more and more compassion, and for ourselves and others.
right. So, the right side, the left side is the feminine or negative charge side of the tree.
Or you could say receptive.
Okay, and the right side is the masculine positive charge, and then the middle column is
And the active.
is the right.
And the middle is the synthesis where the two meet.
Right. So all of these things play out with color, light. There's sacred geometry in this.
Tones.
Yeah, energy work can be used to access the tree of life. And here they talk about their 32 paths, the 10 Sephirah and 22 Hebrew alphabet letters.
Those are the paths that connect the spheres.
Right. And each of the Sephirahs is associated with a divine attribute, a divine name, a pillar, one of the 5 worlds, one of the 5 elements, etc. And a musical note at the very end. Okay. So you can superimpose human DNA on the tree of life, except it has 2 strands. But remember, this really is in 26 dimensions. There could very well be other strands of DNA there, besides the 2 that we can see. We're just, not with it to see what these other strands are. And the DNA is the blueprint for your individual life. And so we end up traveling this DNA just like we travel the tree of life. And so it goes. The nadis, the primary ones are here.
And that's the left and the right, and the center is the Shoshana, which is
Right.
where the Kundalini is said to rise. But it's the same idea of balancing and integrating
Right.
the left and the right
Right.
in the
So
it's really a caduceus.
now we've got a big discussion here on Tzimtzum, and I'm simply looking at the time. Why don't we break here and we'll pick this up next time, because there's really a lot going on here with Tzimtzum and so forth. And
that's really the heart of the mysticism.
Right. It's amazing what is there, and the thought that was given to this. This is some really high-powered intellects that put these ideas together. This is not ding dong school. This is big league. So
I said in class once that it was really like spiritual physics. And my teacher said it's not like spiritual physics, it is spiritual physics. And he said you would believe some of the science going on in Israel around it. I hope they're planning something other than a bomb with it.
they've already got lots of bombs
I know.
in Israel. That's not the issue.
Right. But there is something unique there. There is some, I feel, unique essence that is incredibly important. But I don't think that means that everybody else should be obliterated. But
Right. So anyway, we'll break here. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will catch you next week, and we'll go through the rest of this.
Same bet.
And
same
then-
bet
There's
time.
plenty of stuff to go through. Don't worry. So, okay.
Working
Okay.
on converting you, Bruce.
Hey,
We're working on converting you.
Yeah, you'll be an expert on Kabbalah when we get done.
You'll see.
Okay.
I think you'll see that you know, in a lot of ways, it's a lot like Buddhism.
Yeah,
My teacher did both, so
yeah.
he was part of the, what do they call it, the crazy master school.
oh
The,
yeah,
but-
yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, have a wonderful,
so,
we
very
will catch
good.
it.